Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to speak to you not as passive listeners, but as those who have endured, who have struggled, and who have proven themselves capable of carrying weight. You are not here by accident. You are here because you have passed through fire, and now the time has come to reveal what was once hidden, to tell you everything. When we talk about being tested, we often imagine something dramatic, a blazing trial by fire, a once-in-a-lifetime event where everything is on the line. But in reality, the tests that define us are almost always woven into the ordinary fabric of our days. They come disguised as difficulties we didn't choose, the betrayals that cut us down, the silence from God when we begged for an answer, the failures that humiliated us in front of others. And yet it's precisely those experiences, mundane, painful, often hidden, that make up the true examination. Because you see, the test was not simply about whether you could endure pain. Anyone can suffer. Anyone can be crushed by life. The deeper test was whether, in the midst of suffering, you could resist collapsing into bitterness and despair, whether you could stand again after being knocked flat, whether you could keep your eyes fixed on something higher, even when the evidence all around you suggested that nothing higher existed at all. That's the crucible in which character is forged. That's the point of separation between those who merely live through hardship and those who are transformed by it. Every setback you endured was, in one sense, a question posed to your soul: will you quit or will you rise? Every betrayal was an invitation to harden into cynicism, or, astonishingly, to grow in wisdom and mercy. Every unanswered prayer was a confrontation with the limits of your understanding, a challenge to believe that meaning exists even when it hides itself from view. And you didn't always answer perfectly. None of us do. But what matters is that you returned again and again to the fight. You chose, despite your weakness, not to surrender completely to chaos. That is what it means to pass, not flawlessness, not moral superiority, endurance, the refusal to let the darkness define you. And here's the difficult truth. The reason this was necessary is that people cannot be trusted with greater knowledge until they have proven themselves in the furnace of ordinary struggle. Why? Because knowledge is not neutral. It changes those who hold it. To give it too early, before the heart has been tested, would destroy more than it builds. It would inflate pride, amplify arrogance, and weaponize intelligence. That's why revelation is always hidden behind hardship. The trial comes first because the trial prepares the vessel. Now, think about your own story. Reflect for a moment on the weight of everything you've endured. Ask yourself, were those things random? Was it all meaningless? Or is it possible that every disappointment was actually shaping you into someone capable of carrying more than you once could? Because if you can see that pattern, even dimly, you'll realize that your life was not a sequence of accidents. It was a deliberate refining. You were being prepared. You were being asked the question, will you hold on when it would be easier to let go? And your presence here, listening to these words, is the evidence that you did. But we shouldn't romanticize it. Passing the test didn't mean you came out unscarred. No, passing meant you bore the scars and kept moving anyway. It meant you carried the weight and didn't let it break you completely. The people who failed are not the ones who fell, they are the ones who refused to get up. And so the fact that you are still here, still wrestling with meaning, still searching for truth, that is the victory. That is the proof that you endured. And now, standing on this side of it, you can see more clearly. You recognize that strength is not the absence of weakness, it's the decision to walk forward while weak. You realize that faith is not certainty, it's courage in the presence of doubt. And you know now that survival is not the goal. Transformation is. The test was not to prove to God that you were worthy. It was to show you through the fire that you are capable of becoming far more than you imagined. So when I tell you that you passed, I'm not congratulating you as though the game is over. I'm telling you that the stage is set for the next act. You endured what others could not. You carried the weight when others dropped it. And that means you are prepared, not for rest, but for responsibility. That is the reward, not comfort, but calling. Because endurance alone is never the final word. The final word is transformation. And the test was never about survival. It was about shaping you into someone who can now bear the truth that must be told. So remember this as you step forward. The test you endured was not punishment, it was preparation. You passed not because you were flawless, but because you refused to quit. And that refusal is the seed of greatness. There are truths in this world that cannot be spoken openly, not because they are weak or fragile, but because human beings are. If knowledge is given to someone who has not been prepared to carry it, it can destroy rather than enlighten. This is why, across cultures and centuries, the deepest wisdom has always been concealed, guarded, or spoken in parables. It is not elitism, it is responsibility. You don't hand fire to a child who has not yet learned how not to burn themselves. The same is true for spiritual and psychological truth. It requires maturity, resilience, and tested character before it can be revealed. That's why the trials you endured were not only about survival, they were about shaping you into someone capable of holding weighty knowledge without being crushed by it. Think of it this way: revelation is like lifting a veil, but if your eyes aren't ready, the sudden flood of light will blind you instead of illumine. This is why so much of what governs reality is hidden in plain sight, waiting for the seeker, the one who has been tempered by suffering, to notice. Passing the test means that now you can see what others overlook, not because you are more clever, but because you have been broken enough to recognize what truly matters. And what is hidden knowledge, exactly? It isn't some esoteric code or mystical secret that can be passed along in a sentence. It is an understanding of how reality operates, psychologically, morally, and spiritually. It is realizing that every action you take tilts the balance of the world ever so slightly toward order or chaos. It is grasping the sobering truth that what you do in private reverberates outward, shaping destinies you will never personally witness. It is recognizing that the stories embedded in scripture, myth, and culture are not dead relics, but maps of the human soul. These are not things that can be handed casually to someone who has no reverence for them, because without reverence they will be trivialized, mocked, or misused. This is why you had to endure. To prove that you were not merely curious for entertainment, but committed to truth even when it cost you. To show that you were capable of handling knowledge not as a toy, but as a burden. Because here's the paradox: the reward of deeper truth is not ease, but responsibility. When you understand how much meaning your actions carry, you can no longer excuse yourself with ignorance. You are accountable, and accountability is heavy. That's why so few people want truth. They want comfort dressed up as wisdom. But you endured the stripping away of illusions, and that means you are ready for something more. It is important to understand that this knowledge is not for everyone. And that's not arrogance, that's mercy. Imagine giving nuclear codes to someone with the temperament of a child. Imagine handing down the responsibility of leadership to someone addicted to their own ego. That would not be compassion, it would be destruction. The same principle holds for revelation. Only those who have passed through fire without losing themselves are capable of handling it with humility. Only those who have been emptied of pride can be trusted with the dangerous gift of understanding. So you, the ones who passed, are now in a position to see differently. Where others see only randomness, you can discern pattern. Where others see chaos, you can detect the possibility of order. And that vision changes everything, because it allows you to step into life not as a passive victim, but as a conscious participant. You can read history with new eyes, seeing how the struggles of the past were not merely political or cultural events, but spiritual struggles replaying themselves across generations. You can recognize how your personal story fits into a larger narrative, one that stretches beyond you, beyond this moment, even beyond your lifetime. That's not just knowledge, that's perspective. But again, it is not given for you to boast about. It is given so that you might carry it responsibly. Because hidden knowledge is not meant to isolate you in superiority, it is meant to integrate you into service. It is not the end of the journey, but the beginning of the calling. If you can see what others cannot, then you are obligated to live differently, to act as a light rather than hide in the shadows of cynicism. And so here is the sobering truth: the veil has been lifted for you, but that lifting brings weight. You are no longer free to live as though your choices do not matter. You can no longer pretend ignorance. You have been entrusted with sight, and that sight demands that you walk with greater integrity, greater courage, and greater responsibility. This is what hidden knowledge means: that you now carry something heavy, something dangerous, and something profoundly sacred, and whether it becomes a gift or a curse depends on how you choose to live with it. So I will leave you with this: knowledge is not freedom unless it is lived out in responsibility. The veil is open, the light has come. Now the question is, will you bear it with the weight it deserves? When truth is given, it never arrives empty-handed. It always comes with weight, with consequence, with responsibility. This is one of the deepest paradoxes of human existence. We imagine that receiving knowledge, revelation, or clarity will make life easier. We think, if only I understood what was really going on, then everything would be simple. But that is not how it works. When you finally see clearly, you cannot unsee. And with that clarity comes the burden of acting differently, living differently, bearing the accountability of knowing. That is why truth is never just a gift, it is a summons. Consider the weight of even small truths. If you discover that a close friend is walking a destructive path, you are now responsible for what you do with that knowledge. Ignore it, and you betray them. Confront it, and you risk conflict. Either way, you are no longer innocent. You cannot go back to ignorance. That is the pattern of all revelation. Whether small or great, it always imposes responsibility. And the greater the revelation, the greater the burden. This is why the role of being chosen is not about privilege, it's about service. The chosen are not the ones who escape responsibility, they are the ones who are handed more of it. It is a reversal of what the ego wants. The ego wants status, recognition, superiority, but authentic revelation humbles the ego by laying a weight across its shoulders. Now that you see, you must carry. Now that you know, you must act. That's not the voice of pride, that's the voice of calling. And this is where many people falter. They confuse revelation with self-congratulation. They imagine that being entrusted with truth is proof of their specialness rather than an assignment of duty. But if truth does not drive you to service, then it has already been corrupted in your hands. Knowledge hoarded becomes arrogance. Knowledge lived becomes wisdom. The distinction is life or death, not only for you, but for those your life will influence. It helps to think about it in psychological terms. Every time you come to understand something deeper about yourself, your patterns of resentment, your capacity for cruelty, your hidden potential, you are faced with a choice. Do you integrate that knowledge responsibly or do you dismiss it? Because once you've glimpsed your own capacity for darkness, you can never again pretend that evil is only out there in the world. You've seen it in yourself. And if you don't accept the responsibility that comes with that knowledge, then you risk becoming its servant rather than its master. Revelation exposes both light and shadow. Responsibility is the discipline that allows you to choose which side you will embody. The same is true on the collective level. When you begin to understand how society functions, when you see the cycles of corruption and renewal, the patterns of oppression and resistance, you are no longer free to live as a passive observer. To know is to be implicated. Silence becomes complicity. Action becomes duty. That is the burden of those who see clearly. Neutrality is no longer an option. But don't misunderstand this as a punishment. It is, in fact, the greatest privilege you could ever be given, to have your life tied to something larger than yourself. A burden, yes, but a meaningful burden. One that stretches you, shapes you, and gives depth to every breath you take. The weight of responsibility is precisely what prevents life from collapsing into triviality. Without responsibility, existence becomes shallow, selfish, and hollow. With responsibility, existence becomes noble. This is why those who have passed the test are not rewarded with comfort, but with calling. The true gift of being chosen is not that you escape hardship, but that your hardship is transformed into a mission. The revelation you've received is not the end of the story, it's the beginning of your accountability. You are meant to stand, not only as one who endured, but as one who now bears the torch for others still stumbling in darkness. So the question, then, is not whether you wanted this weight. Most of the time, people don't. The question is whether you will accept it now that it has been placed upon you. Because once knowledge has been given, the choice is no longer whether you will bear responsibility. It's how. Will you live in a way that honors the truth you've been shown? Or will you turn away, pretending blindness even though you see? And here is the reality: to refuse responsibility is to waste revelation. To embrace responsibility is to transform it into destiny. That is what separates the wise from the arrogant, the chosen from the deceived. So understand this deeply. Every truth you have been shown is now a task. Every revelation is now a call to live more courageously, more humbly, more responsibly. The burden is heavy, yes, but it is also the path to greatness. We are often tempted to think that endurance and revelation mark the end of the journey, as though passing the test and receiving hidden knowledge is the final chapter. But that's a misunderstanding. Those moments are not conclusions, they are thresholds. To pass the test is to graduate into a new kind of responsibility. To be entrusted with knowledge is to be commissioned, not completed. The real question is not what you endured or even what you learned, it's what you will now do with it. Because history does not end with survival, it begins with creation. A new era has begun. And eras don't arrive like lightning, crashing into the world with obvious spectacle. They arrive quietly, unfolding through the choices of individuals who are awake enough to see what others miss. The dawn of something new is rarely recognized in its own time because it doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It hides in the hearts of people who have been prepared to act differently. That's you. You are the builders of what comes next, but building is far more difficult than surviving. Anyone can cling to life when forced, anyone can endure when they have no choice. But to create, to voluntarily shoulder the task of constructing meaning, of shaping culture, of embodying truth in a broken age, that requires courage of another order. It requires you to say, I will not only endure this chaos, I will transform it. I will take the raw materials of suffering and fashion them into something better. That's the calling of the chosen, not to bask in revelation, but to translate it into action. Think about what this means on the personal level. If you have been refined by fire, then your relationships cannot remain shallow or dishonest. You must build them differently, with more integrity, more responsibility, more courage. If you have been entrusted with knowledge, then your daily choices can no longer be trivial. They must be aligned with something higher, something worthy of the truth you now carry. And on a collective level, it means that the shape of society itself will be influenced by whether or not you rise to this task. Cultures collapse not because their enemies defeat them, but because their members fail to build anything solid enough to withstand the storm. That is why you matter more than you realize. The builders of a new age are never the majority. They are always a minority, those who saw, those who endured, those who took responsibility. And yet, it is always the minority who shift the trajectory of the whole. Think of the prophets, the reformers, the visionaries of history. They were almost always isolated, mocked, misunderstood. And yet their lives bore fruit that reshaped generations. They built when others only endured. They acted when others despaired. That's the blueprint you are being handed. Now, let's be clear. Building does not mean utopian fantasy. It does not mean believing you can remake the world overnight. That's arrogance disguised as hope. Building means starting where you are, with what you have, in the corner of reality you've been given. It means taking responsibility for your family, your work, your community, your own soul, and living as though those things matter. Because they do. The architecture of a new age is always constructed brick by brick, in lives that seem small but carry immense ripple effects. And this is the sobering thought. If you refuse to build, if you collapse back into passivity, then revelation has been wasted. The test you passed will have no meaning. Knowledge without action decays into arrogance. But if you choose to build, even falteringly, imperfectly, then your endurance and your revelation bear fruit. They become seeds that will outlive you. And isn't that the deepest mark of greatness? That your life becomes more than your own survival, more than your own comfort, that it becomes a foundation for those who come after you. So the time of merely enduring is over. The time of merely knowing is over. The era that has begun demands participation. It calls for builders, men and women who will weave meaning out of suffering, order out of chaos, light out of darkness. That is the destiny of the chosen ones, not to escape the world, but to transform it, not to wait for someone else, but to step forward as the architects of a future that others will inherit. And that leaves you with a choice, stark and unavoidable. Will you live as a passive survivor, clinging to what has already been, or will you rise as a builder of what is yet to come? Because the truth is simple, though it is heavy. The future will be built by someone. The only question is, will it be built by you?